Hello and welcome back for another installment in our Courtroom Confidential Conversation series, where we are pulling back the curtain on some of the voices and faces in true crime you've likely seen, heard, and maybe even followed for years. We're talking to creators, podcasters, YouTubers, the people who dig deep into the cases we discuss every week. But now we're turning the spotlight on the storytellers themselves, digging deep into their story to find out what influenced their journey into true crime, what fuels their passion, and the moments that have shaped their path. I'm your host, Joshua Ritter, an award-winning Los Angeles prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney with over 15 years experience navigating the criminal justice system. For this episode, please join me in welcoming true crime producer, journalist, and podcast host, Alexis Linkletter. Hello, Alexis. How are you?
I am doing so well. How are you?
I'm doing very, very good. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm a big fan of a lot of the work that you've done with the podcast and with the docuseries, and you have had yourself either directly involved in front of the camera or behind the camera in the true crime world for a very long time. And so I'm fascinated to hear about your career and that whole journey that it's been. So are the people who are watching and listening now. But I also want to hear a little bit about where you came from and how that all began. So let's start there if we can. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what life was like.
So I grew up on Long Island, on the North Shore of Long Island. My mom is and was an attorney back then, which is sort of how I first became interested in the legal system and crime. But yeah, I had a really beautiful, idyllic upbringing on Long Island, and the rest of my family was in California. So I would come back and forth. And for as long as I can remember, I just dreamed of moving to LA one day. I wanted to work in the entertainment industry. And that's ultimately what I did once I graduated high school.
And there's a reason in your family history why Hollywood might have been calling your name, and I want to ask a little bit about that. But I'm curious because I want to skip ahead, but we'll get back to it later.
Yeah.
But you do eventually your career leads you towards talking about the Long Island serial killer, talking about Rex Heuermann. Was that something you were aware of when you were growing up there at an early age?
You know, those murders associated with the Long Island serial killer case started to be known in about 2010. That's when
Okay.
remains started to be discovered. So I had already moved to LA, but I got interested in it right away because it was, happening around these beaches that I grew up going to,
Wow.
that are just very prominent in my memories and in my childhood. But I had known that there was a lot of very unique and interesting crime unfolding all over Long Island as I was growing up there. So
Okay.
going back to investigate was really something cathartic in a lot of ways for me and really strange, but
Yeah.
important in at
Yeah.
least my story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's a little teaser for what we'll get into later, because I just think that is amazing I mean, I can't imagine to just all of a sudden realize in a place where you grew up, some monster was kind of operating in that same area, and then especially that it fits into the career that you've made for yourself. But we'll get to that later. First, I want to talk a little bit about tell us the connection that your family has to Hollywood, especially with your great grandfather.
Yeah, so when I moved to Los Angeles, a big reason why I wanted to is because my great grandfather lived here and I grew up visiting him at his house in Bel Air. And he was a media personality starting in really the 60s and 70s. And he was still very much alive when I moved here and played a really pivotal role in what I ultimately wanted to do. And I think his name's Art Linkletter, and he was a radio personality, a TV personality. And what I realized as I'm getting older is that he also suffered a lot of personal tragedy. He lost 3 children before he died, 2 of them in
Oh,
very
wow.
public, tragic ways. And a lot of the coverage of those crimes, well, they weren't crimes, they were tragedies, but um, really, I think, shaped a lot of what happened for the rest of my family. A lot of pain was experienced, and I think it really gave me a glimpse into into what that's like for people who lose loved ones publicly like that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about this kind of generational trauma and how people inherit that. I was not aware of that, was something that, it sounds like kind of set a tone for your family for years to come. Was that exposure to art and, he's kind of a famous producer and creator behind, many shows that a lot of our listeners are gonna be familiar with. One that stood out to me was Kids Say the Darndest Things. It's been a show that's been on, in different generations for several decades, but was there something about do you feel like there was something about having that in your family that thought, "Oh, this is a world that maybe I could get involved in even at a young age?"
It didn't occur to me at first because what I just organically was pulled towards was the true crime space. It really didn't occur to me. And then I realized that there were so many similarities in what I wanted to do and what he did, which is really just connect with people. He had this amazing way with children, as you mentioned, with his show Kids Say the Darndest Things, and really just like that vulnerability and that ability to like have people open up to you. That's something that I emulated, perhaps subconsciously, for a long time because there is just that component, as I'm sure you know, of like needing to connect with subjects of these stories and those that experience very, you know, traumatic things oftentimes. So I do think that's something that later, as I grew up a bit, I realized that I was mirroring to some degree or aspiring towards.
And that is a central part of the work that you do is this kind of the story of the victim playing a central role in that and something I really appreciate about your work. So when did this interest, fascination with true crime start with you?
So I was always interested in it. I remember in my senior year of high school, we had to do a senior project, and I picked Ted Bundy as my subject. I wasn't sure why. I really had no understanding. That was in 2005, 2004. So we weren't seeing just the level of true crime that we're seeing now. And I just had this interest. I wanted to understand a mind that would be drawn to committing acts of cruelty. I didn't understand that. Um, so that's when I was first interested. And then after I moved to Los Angeles, I started working at Discovery Studios, which was a production company affiliated with Discovery Communications. And I was working under producers that did several different types of content, like wedding shows for TLC, Shark Week shows, and true crime shows. And I just kept being drawn to that genre. That interest just really kept calling to me. And then from there, my next job was a production company doing all true crime shows, and it just never stopped from there
Was this before or after college?
after.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Cal State Northridge.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Yeah.
CSUN.
Mhm.
What was the plan going to college? Was it this idea of I like true crime, I like television, I wanna see if I can't find where these 2 meet?
I knew I wanted to work in the mass communication field. I wasn't sure at the time, I just moved here and it was like shows like The Hills were on and I was watching Sex in the City and I was like, ooh, PR might be fun, and like I was like, maybe I'll be a publicist. And I never like I tried that right after college and it didn't feel important at all.
Mm.
I had some success with that, but I just like didn't love it at all. So that's when a family friend was like, I'm looking for an assistant. I'm a producer. Like, I can try that. And that's sort of when I realized like what storytelling was and understanding sort of just like how these things we're watching on TV are made. And that's sort of when I was like, oh, there's a tangible aspect here that I can definitely grasp. And that's what I started doing.
This friend, was that the producer at Discovery? That was the first kind of opportunity?
Yeah, she
Tell
was
us
a
what
family friend of a friend, but she was doing, like, mostly wedding shows, so I started with that.
Okay. Tell us one, I wanna know what your role was beginning, but tell us, like, we throw around these terms like producer, I feel all the time. And I don't even have a good handle on what exactly that means, but what were you doing? What does a producer do? What was your involvement at Discovery initially?
So I was one of two assistants working at Discovery Studios under three different overall producers, executive producers. And this was basically the development arm of Discovery. So basically, what these producers would do is conceptualize ideas, find the talent, come up with the angle for what the show was. One example I could think of is the producer I was working for was trying to come up with a new concept for Bravo, which was sort of like a housewives concept. Um, and it was going to be about the upper echelon of New Orleans and really like the carnival scene and like the parades, but it was like rich people, so they're finding the talent, they're making little teasers to then take to Bravo and see if they want to pick the show up. So that was really my job to assist in all of these ideas, these development projects, and help push them over the finish.
Did you love it?
I loved it. I loved it. I really loved the true crime concepts that I was able to really get my hands in. And I don't know if it was the psychology that drew me to it or just the depth, the magnitude, I think, of the types of loss associated with stories like this. I think it feels just important to me.
Were you, as you worked, able to kind of eventually start to be involved in developing your own projects or being more hands-on with some of these and pushing them towards the true crime genre?
Not in that job. I was there for about a year before I started
Okay.
working at my next job at a different production company. And it really was the relationship with the owner of that production company that changed my life. I still work with her today, almost 15 years later.
Wow.
Yeah, so I started as a researcher there and moved up, and now I've been an executive producer alongside her on several projects that I help conceptualize. So it really was like working my way up and building those key relationships really early on that made such a huge difference.
Can you share her name with us?
Yeah, her name is Joke Finsioen. She's from Belgium. She's an exotic
Oh,
name. And she owns a company called Joke Productions. And she gave me my first job after I was an assistant. And I talk to her every day. We still work really closely together. So it's been a really amazing progression with her.
that's fantastic. I love that. I love these chance meetings that turn into life-changing moments and lifetime friends and colleagues and mentors and everything else. What tell us about some of the early projects that you worked on that were like your baby in this true crime genre or otherwise. I'm just curious, like what were the first things you really got your hands into?
So some shows I can recall working on early on. It was a show called She Made Me Do It, which was for the Oxygen Network. It was like under the Snapped family. It was Snapped. She Made Me Do It. And
Gotcha.
it was basically profiling crimes that in which a female perpetrator is the mastermind, but the physical executioner of the crime is a man. So it talked about, we profiled crimes really where there was like a psychological aspect that we were deconstructing through the storytelling. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
I love that. And the thing about it is I'm sitting there going, how do you create a whole series of shows out of that? But I imagine there are plenty of stories that fall into that category.
There are more than you would expect. I mean, I think one of the most shocking
A
things
lot
about
of clever, evil women out there is what I'm hearing.
and men, we see the
Yeah.
same thing. Obviously, we know that men perpetrate more crime than women. So I think that's why there is an interest in those, because all of true crime and the interest in it is really just ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. So I think people really are drawn to it for that reason.
It's such a great way of putting it because it is hard, I think, sometimes to explain to people why is true crime such a fascination and such a big genre. I mean, when you go on Apple Podcasts or something and you see the categories of top podcasts, a lot of those are true crime. And why is that? And I think the way that you put it, say that again, it's fascinating. People put in fascinating situations.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think so many people, with all this true crime programming, it's easy to think that maybe there's more evil in the world than there actually is. But I think overwhelmingly people are good. And I think most people are empathetic. So I think if you have a healthy empathetic brain, you want to understand cruelty. You really do. You
Yeah.
want to try to fathom how someone might be willing to or enjoy harming someone because most people can't fathom that. So I think that was a big part of it, at least for me. And I think it's why so many people watch it.
Do you think part of it psychologically too is there's something about seeing, like to your point about an ordinary person, to seeing someone that living a normal life have this nightmare take place, whether to them or to their loved ones, and the idea that we want to kind of explore how that might be, but be very safe and away from it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like I feel like the stories that resonate most with people, it's not when you hear about a person living, kind of a high risk lifestyle who gets into trouble. It's when you hear about that normal housewife who was out for a jog and got kidnapped by random people and never heard from again type of thing. That's the thing that really draws folks in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really hard for people to stomach the idea that you could be doing everything right in air quotes. Not that that should dictate your safety, but the idea that you could be just moving along, going your 9 to 5, minding your own business, and that something might happen to you. I think that's everybody's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
And um, trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's experienced that, I think terrifies people and intrigues them.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is important too, like you said, that this is real life stuff we're talking about. I mean, there are people who have hobbies and are fascinated with far more superficial things than something like true crime. So, what are you actually doing during this time when you're working with your new mentor? And I'm not going to even try to say her name, but we heard you joke
Yeah.
joke. What do you like? Tell us like the day-to-day kind of stuff. What does a producer do? Are you trying to find the stories and then develop how you're going to tell that story, or what's all involved?
Exactly right. So, using the concept I mentioned as an example, where, we find cases that fit this criteria, right? So, my part of my job was, hey, go through newspaper archives, find these particular stories that fit these criteria. And then after that, write it up in write it in a way that is appealing from a storytelling sense, kind of like in an act structure in which you would see sort of an episode play out. Then your job after that is to reach out to the people involved with the case and see if they're open to sharing their experience and telling their story. And usually, to tell a complete story, you need every facet of sort of that case: law enforcement, um, attorneys, ideally, and people associated with the victims and people associated with the perpetrator, and possibly a journalist too. Anyone else who might be pertinent to telling an honest, factual story, like witnesses, things like that.
How long does it take to put together something like that? Because as you're explaining it, I'm thinking like that's a tremendous amount of work to track those people down, convince them, coordinate, the filming of all of them.
It takes a long time. So usually when we begin this undertaking, we are given sort of like we have 3 months to pull 8 episodes together or something like that.
Wow.
Um,
Hmm.
I can't remember exactly, but it would be something like that. And they, the production company hires the number of people that they think they need to achieve that. And it's never, in my experience, it always comes together. I've never seen it like not happen. Um, it's amazing. And as far as getting people on board, most people after they participate in a series or something like that are pretty happy with the experience. It can be very cathartic and therapeutic to share your story, especially if you were associated with a victim and there's a call to action that's important to you, legislation changes, keeping the memory of someone alive who you lost. It can be very powerful.
That was gonna be my next question is what is the response that you get from people? And you kinda shared that with some of us, but was it ever difficult kind of, you're talking to people about perhaps the most nightmarish, tragic thing that ever happened in their lives, a life-changing moment. And you're some random producer from Hollywood calling them, was that ever difficult?
Yes. For me to call them is awful. I hate it.
Yeah,
But like I do it and I'm an empathetic person, so I care about them, and I personally have had only good experiences. I've kept in touch with most of the people who, who really had to, like, pour their hearts out to me. It's why I do it with my podcast, which I know we'll get to. I've become very good at it, but I know that there are producers in Hollywood who are not good at it, don't have the decorum or bedside manner to be doing it, so they shouldn't be doing it. And I know there are some horror stories out there.
yeah,
There's a whole movement, this push towards like ethical true crime production, and I'm all for it because I just think
yeah,
if you're not naturally inclined to be empathetic and understand what you're asking of people to rip these scabs open and share for the entertainment of others, which is frankly what it is, it can be one thing for them, right? It can be positive, it can be empowering, it can be therapeutic, but it's a business for these networks. We have to be
yeah.
honest about that. Um, if you are going to do this the right way and make sure that person feels safe and seen and emotionally safe with the process, you shouldn't be in this business. Their needs need to come before business needs.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm so glad that you vocalized that because I do feel like the true crime genre is a place where you really have to tread much more lightly than you would, if you're covering sports, go ahead and dig into it. You wanna criticize a football player, a basketball player, have at it. Same thing with entertainment, politics, but these are people who have put themselves out there, right? Their whole life is kind of in the spotlight, in the media, and criticism of that or talking about it or creating an entertainment tangentially surrounding that makes sense. True crime involves people who never on earth wanted to have a reporter calling them, people who were just living their quiet little lives and then tragedy struck. So not only do they have to deal with that horrible tragedy and loss of someone that they loved, now they've got people, either wanting to talk to them directly or talking about them in an entertaining and demeaning way, which is even far worse. So I'm so glad that you articulated the way that you did. There's a responsibility involved in telling these stories.
Oh, 1,000,000%. Like you said, it was very poignant. People don't want to be in this position.
Yeah.
Um, it's really, really, really hard. And you do need to have a very empathetic, you need to lead with empathy when you're talking to these people. Um, they deserve that at the very least. And
Yeah.
I feel really lucky now where the position I'm in, I only tell stories when people come to me.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully, like with one of my podcasts, which we'll get into, it's all crowdsourced. People reach out if they want their story on a platform, and I have never been happier that in that approach to storytelling where because everybody's looking for a place to share or to educate the public. So that's been feeling great.
Oh, fantastic. And I want to get to those. So let's talk a little bit about what eventually led to your own podcast and your own work. But you were still kind of telling us about your time as a producer. How did your career develop since then?
Yeah, so I was at that same production company, Joe Productions, and my best friend, Jack Vanek, she hosts a successful podcast called, well, she co-hosts it with two other co-hosts called The Lady Gang. And she just exploded. Their podcast was huge. It continues to be. And we've been best friends since college. And we were both obsessed with true crime. We really were. And I found myself in my day job writing these episodes constantly. And I was like, I know how to tell these stories. I know how to conduct these interviews. I know how to produce a show. So why don't we do it together? And we'll, co host this show. And then we conceptualized an idea based on the fact that somebody I went to high school with. It's called The First Degree. And the idea was that we're all 1 degree of separation from a crime, to
Mm,
kind of demonstrate just how ubiquitous and rampant these experiences are, kind of a great equalizer. And, someone I went to high school with, I was very close to, ended up murdering someone right after we graduated. And Jack, one of her childhood friends' mom, um, ended up doing a murder for hire, and she was sleeping over this house with this mom, like, her whole childhood. So we're like, wow,
wow.
like, you can be right next to somebody and not know what they're capable of. And it was sort of how that idea was born. And on every episode, we tell a story from the vantage point of our interviewee. So every episode has an interview subject who has experienced a crime in either a straightforward way or in a unique way. We've done like we did Ted Bundy through the eyes of someone who witnessed the execution, right? To like paint a picture of the madness surrounding that and all of sort of the controversial ideas about that. So we do sort of well-known cases from an unconventional point of view. So yeah, that's sort of how that concept was born. And we've done like 400 episodes to this point
That's
now.
incredible. And I want to talk about the endurance needed to do something like that because you've been doing this since 2018.
Mhm.
But tell us what there's a big difference there in mindset and everything else from going behind the camera, behind the microphone, as it were, to now in front of it and being the one actually, recorded telling these stories. Was that something that you were drawn towards? Did it come naturally or was it something that you struggled with?
Well, starting with a podcast was really good because
Okay.
it's just slightly easier than being on camera because
Mm,
less pressure, right? So, no, I was ready. I felt really comfortable with it right away. I really believed in my abilities at that point, although there was a learning curve with, the podcast world and which opinions to express. You did want to still approach it journalistically, which can be
mm.
really hard when you're witnessing injustice or hearing about it. Um, but no, I was ready for it. But there was still a learning curve. It's really hard to put yourself in a position to be criticized. When you're a producer behind the scenes on a show, no one's criticizing you, maybe the show. But yeah, no, facing criticism early on was hard, but important for, I don't self-development, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny too how uh, even the smallest amount of feedback can really start, you go from getting no comments from the public about the work you're doing to all of a sudden, even if they start to trickle in, it's a dangerous position that you might find yourself in being really affected by it, both negatively and positively. Even if they're saying great stuff about you, not trying to let that give you too much, go to your head too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And hearing negative feedback, I still get negative feedback, and I've gotten a lot really tough. It's really hard to like rattle me with
Yeah.
criticism now, which is great. But it's important to remember that I do have and will continue to make mistakes. Like, there is, I am definitely imperfect, especially when you approach nuanced subjects like suffering
Yeah.
and justice. It's like, I will continue to make mistakes, and you just got to know, like, you're a good person, put one foot in front of the other and do your best and just try to lead with integrity, and that's literally all you can do, but you'll never please everybody, so there's no point
Yeah.
in trying.
Well, and for all the reasons we discussed too, it is not a safe topic. I mean, you're not talking about something that kind of everybody falls on exactly the same side of it. That you're talking about, like you said, pain and suffering and hurtful stuff. And how do you approach that with a empathetic, soft touch and at the same time express your opinions? I applaud the work that you've done. So since 2018, going on 400, did you say over 400 or approaching
We do
400?
3 episodes a week, so we've
Oh,
done, like,
wow.
600, but as far as, like, our traditional format, we're somewhere between 300 and 400. I need to, like, get the exact number.
So people understand. Tell us the amount of work that goes into that, because this isn't you just sitting down, you and Jack, turning on the microphones and saying, let's go for it. Like there's a tremendous amount of production and homework and everything that goes into these episodes. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So for the first 2 years, we made not a dollar on it. So
Which is a long time, by the way.
it is. And I was
Yeah.
working full time as a producer, and doing this on nights and weekends. And so what that meant was that I did everything myself 100% of the time. So how it would begin is someone emails us like, I want to tell the story. I think it would make a great episode. So I would schedule a time. I would schedule a Zoom or call. I would do the interview. I would have that transcribed. Then I would do all the research and build it out like a TV show, like a documentary where, there was VO and poignant moments coming from the interview subject. And I would script these, 20-page long scripts. And then we would get together. We had a third host at one time as well. So the three of us would need to coordinate, get together, record it. Then we would need to edit it and like edit the interview into it. Then we would need to have it mixed and then create all the sort of social media stuff around it and marketing stuff. So that was all me for like the first 100 episodes, I would say. A lot of
Incredible.
work. It's a lot of work.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
Exhausting amount of work. And if you're not even making a penny doing it.
So, yeah, but I just knew, it's not so bad when you love it. It really isn't.
Yeah.
And I was proud of it. And I just felt like it was going to go somewhere. And I really believe that for everything. If you don't give up on it, I really believe it will go somewhere if you believe in it. And that applies to anyone doing anything.
Right. Yeah. Well, especially if you have your passion behind it and you know that this is something that other people are passionate about as well. Okay, so you're doing that 2 years. It's you're pumping out content. That's the other thing. Is in that 2 years worth of time, if you really want it to be successful, you can't give up. I mean, there's all these statistics about how many podcasts have started and failed because people just give up because like it's a lot of work after a year of nothing really kind of turning that corner that you were hoping to. Many people just say, I'm done. I got other things. I got bills to pay. I don't have all the time in the world. Tell us about how that finally started to feel like, okay, this is going somewhere. This is becoming something. And then you kind of use that as a springboard for other projects.
Yeah. So probably 2 years in, we started to see some like, we had a network, we had a deal, and basically when you sign on with a podcast network, they're selling ads to go in your show, which can help you propel the show forward. Still financially though, it's like we were 3 co-hosts. So you're splitting everything 3 ways. You weren't making anything. Like it was very menial. So if I wanted to do this for my career, I did need to figure out how to make it work because I was running myself ragged, working full time and doing all of that. So from there, we eventually did start making money because it is that consistency. You can't miss like a single week if listeners start relying on you, because they lose interest. So we start making money from it, which is great. And as that was happening, is really when my interest in the Long Island serial killer was running parallel to all of this. And I started conceptualizing a way like, hey, maybe there's a story here involved in the Long Island serial killer case that hasn't been told. And maybe I'm the right person to tell it. So that development was happening alongside my podcast journey.
Tell us then about that, because that is a big project that a lot of people are familiar with you from. We're talking about Unraveled, right? The docuseries that eventually it was investigation discovery, right?
Yes.
How does that go? I'm really curious about this. How does that go from I'm Alexis, I've got a brilliant idea, I know how to tell stories, I know this is a good story, to actually finding the people and the money and the making it happen and all of that?
Okay, so how it started is that I, aside from being interested in the Long Island serial killer case, because that's where I'm from, I had a friend from high school who was directly involved in sort of the police corruption associated with that case.
Yeah.
Basically, his name is Chris Loeb. We're not friends anymore, unfortunately. But at the time, we had grown up in the same group of friends, really. So when I was working as a true crime producer, I had been hearing that he was in jail because he'd gotten himself in a situation involving the Suffolk County police chief. And Suffolk County is the jurisdiction that was overseeing the Long Island serial killer case. So he basically broke into the police chief's car and stole a duffel bag that contained some really questionable items. The police chief and several other officers then not broke in, but arrested Chris at his home with his mom, and then brought him into the police station and beat him and violated his civil rights. But then he was silenced and thrown into jail. So I heard about all this. I'm like, whoa, I got to talk to him. This is a crazy story. But I thought it was a story about police corruption and much simpler than it ultimately was. So I started visiting him. I started flying out to New York to visit him in jail where he was in Queens. And that's when I realized the connection that this police chief was also overseeing the Long Island serial killer investigation at that point. So if he's willing to do these corrupt things to him, what else is he willing to do? So I started digging into this police chief. His name's James Burke. And then we learned that he's brutalizing sex workers and doing all sorts of horrible things when we know the victims in the Long Island serial killer case are sex workers. So all of this is happening, and I'm doing my podcast, The First Degree. So I go into my day job at Joke Productions, and I tell my mentor, Joke, about all of this. She's like, wow, this is such a fascinating idea. Like, let's dig in and see if there's something here. Because at the time, we were working on a show for HLN, which is CNN's sister network, about the Golden State Killer case.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we just done, and I was a producer on that series called Unmasking a Killer. And it was about an unsolved case. So we were like, hey, this case is unsolved. Maybe we can do a similar series about the Long Island serial killer case and sort of unravel how the police corruption may have influenced the delay in solving it, which we know it definitely did. So that was the angle. We were like, not who is it, but why isn't it solved? Right? Let's
Love
shine
that.
a light
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
That process then became, okay, you know, we got to get all that on paper to basically send it around to the networks. And we create like a 3-minute long trailer known as a sizzle reel to try to sell this concept to networks. We do all of that, and none of the networks are interested. Everybody passes. And it's like, this sucks. No one wants to do it.
I want to interrupt you for one quick second. Tell us, how often does that happen, though? How
99%
often?
of the time.
Right. So the idea that you get something that somebody actually picks up is just
Numbers.
a hidden gem,
Yeah.
needle in haystack type of stuff.
Yeah, you have to, if you want to succeed in that business, like you have to be not afraid of hearing no, but
Wow.
that was really hard, because I've been working at this company. I had seen a lot of projects not happen. This felt really personal. I was also on camera for this. It was like my first time, like, hey, maybe you're the right person to tell this story since you have this relationship with this guy, Chris, who's in the middle of the story. So that hurt. But one of the best things I ever did was not give up, because even though everybody said no, including Investigation Discovery at that point, for whatever reason, like a year later, they're like, hey, like, can we see that again? Like, it might be the right time. And we're like,
What is behind that? What is behind the no many times? Is it that they're not interested, or is it money, or is it they're looking for what's going on in their heads? Or do you have no idea and that's why you just keep hammering away?
And I'm not speaking about ID specifically. By the way, I love working with them. They're incredible partners. And they really took a chance on this ultimately, and had a real hand in like keeping media pressure on this case to solve it. But speaking very generally about these networks who are tasked with buying and choosing what projects get made, it's a million factors. Sometimes it's budgetary, where they see an amazing project come across their desk, but they've already spent all their money that year. And it's like, hey, but sometimes if it's good enough, they can go to their higher ups and they'll release more money, right? It's like, if it's $1 million idea, pretty much they can make it happen. Or $1 million talent, like they call these people, it's just, or a breaking case, crazy access. Like if a perpetrator agrees to tell a story, or like we just saw an amazing series with Nicole Brown Simpson's family agreeing to speak and
Oh,
participate
wow.
in the series for the first time. Right. So it's like we've heard that story, but that was like, they pushed that forward because like they had never really spoken. Right. And like
Yeah.
it was always OJ's story and it was time to give Nicole a spotlight. Right. So like there are all these examples of like when they will make something happen. Sometimes it's just arbitrary. Sometimes the networks don't know what they want. They don't know what their audience, because they're working for their audiences,
Yeah.
and they don't know what people don't know what they want. And it's like during the pandemic, for example, everyone was looking for their Tiger King. Everyone wanted a Tiger King. For a while, everyone wanted their the Jinx, right?
Right.
Like
Right. Oh,
these
yeah.
sort of like huge shows that people are looking for their versions of. So it can be arbitrary or it can be very focused. You just don't know.
Yeah. But in your case, whatever it was, whatever magic sauce needed to take place, investigation discovery says, hey, remember that idea?
Yeah.
Tell us what happens next.
They were interested in the idea. And at that time, they were interested in, um, doing, we were going to do a 2-hour documentary special on the case from that angle and a companion podcast.
Mm.
So, which would be, I believe it was 9 episodes. But then they wanted like 5 seasons, which were 5 2-hour specials and companion podcasts. So then we had to pitch some other ideas because that's just how they were doing their programming at that time.
So
So,
they wanted 5 on different topics.
yeah,
Oh, so they go, great idea. Give me 4 more.
yeah,
Oh, wow. No pressure.
yeah. So then we did that too. And we have all 5 seasons. Obviously, like our big season was the Long Island serial killer case. And then after we did the other seasons as well. And then after the arrest, they revived the podcast. So I've been doing that ever since the suspect was arrested.
And that is called Unraveled as well?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So you've got 2 podcasts you're doing now.
Yes.
What do you do with all your spare time?
I'm writing a book about the Long Island serial killer case now.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah, it's like a memoir about that time, which is challenging and
I
fascinating.
bet. I
Yeah.
bet. And you're getting yourself into an entirely different genre as well. I mean, you're working your way around from podcasting to docuseries to now literature. So good for you. That's fantastic. Tell us, that was kind of going to be my next question. I was joking a little bit, but what other projects do you have? What can you share with us? Things that you're working on? What's going on?
So the book is my next major undertaking, which I'm excited about because you really get to expand on some of the big ideas that just exist naturally in a case like the Long Island serial killer case, like, misogyny,
Mm,
really the marginalization of the victims in this case, which really plays into why it wasn't solved for such a long time. And, the exploitation of power um, that really existed in the past police regimes that were tasked with solving this case, and really like the inception of that corruption, which began long ago. And it also, allows me to explore parallels in my personal life that really align with some of these ideas. Um, because I made a lot of mistakes in that time and I learned a lot. And it really like teaches you to be up close and personal to something so large as like getting justice for these women, right? Who were horrifically killed, having a front row seat to just the smaller stories within a story this large. You really start to understand like every single moment that leads up to these tragedies and every moment after. Um, and really just the pain that surrounds a case like this. It's really amazing how many people it's touched and harmed. And to try to even articulate that is just like seems impossible, but the book's allowing me a chance to explore that and just like certain stories within the story of women that haven't been told. So I'm excited to pursue it.
I'm excited to read it. Because I think you st- you've kind of articulated something that has bothered me about this case as well. I mean, the police corruption is an incredible story, but putting that aside as kind of a preface to how the whole thing unfolded, it is the idea that in many places in the media, they describe the victims in this case as sex workers. And
Mm.
it's kind of like that's the only descriptor they're given. And the idea that these were fully formed human beings with lives and loved ones and everything else just kind of gets lost in all of that. And to some extent, you understand that the people, journalists, and everyone else need to tell the story, and that is important, I think, to understanding the killer as to why he may have been targeting them, or what type of person he was looking for, why he was able to take advantage of them, why they didn't go, why them going missing may kind of have some explanation behind it. But I agree with what you're saying is that just simply dismissing them as that one term is not fair to them as victims.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that I haven't seen talked about much is just, I think the older I get, the more and more I realize like how important each of our childhoods are. Um,
Mm.
Decisions we make as adults that feel like so instinctually, like it's like you can't fight them, all started in our childhoods, right? And it's like people make these generalizations about women who go into sex work as though it's some just like casual choice. And it's like
Mm.
our entire, like so much of our roadmaps are dictated about how we're treated as children. Um, Generationally traumatic incidences, like we talked about in the beginning. Um, And I think we all, to some degree, can understand like parts of our childhood and how they made us who we are and maybe pulled us towards mistakes, that in hindsight we can see our mistakes. So I just think so much of that needs to be explored and like realizing that anyone can go down the ease in which people can go down a dark path so quickly. Like there are so many times in my childhood where I almost did. I really can't
Mm.
believe I didn't. Just based on some of the circumstances that I experienced. And it's like that empathy for them needs to be like the top thing when talking about
Yeah.
them. And it's like literally it could be anyone who gets pulled into a world that puts you at risk. And I just think that needs to be really highlighted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
No one aspires.
oh, of course, no one aspires, but like these perpetrators are also wronged in their childhoods. And I'm not like
Mm.
calling for empathy for any of them, but let's understand that because dangerous people are being created. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I know people debate nature versus nurture, but overwhelmingly, experts will tell you, even if you're born with a propensity for that, if you're treated well as a child, you could avoid those dark, urges. And I think like
Sure.
if we know, children need to be treated better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, that's what I was saying is that no one aspires to find themselves in a very desperate life, in a life that's just kind of, uh, you know, eking out the next day to survive. No one wishes that when they're a young person. Um, and I think it's overly dismissive to say, well, they're there because of the choices they made. Not necessarily. Sometimes things happen that you can't prevent and you have no control over that people have to, just to get by, maybe make some difficult decisions that none of us would picture ourselves in. So I look forward to you exploring all of that. It sounds like it's going to be an incredible book. Between the book and the podcasts, is that full-time work for you, or do you got other stuff going on?
No, the podcast, the book, and then I just have a couple projects that I'm like TV shows I'm developing, and I still do that same work where I'm trying to push them over the finish line. I work with
Yeah.
Jolt still. We have several projects
Okay.
trying to in other companies too. So yeah, I'm just sort of in the true crime full time.
I love it. I love it. This was so fantastic, and I thank you so much for your time and explaining all of that to us. Before I let you go, though, tell us. We've talked about First Degree. Find that wherever you get your podcast. We've talked about Unraveled, both as a docuseries and as a podcast. Where else can I direct people to go to find out more about you and the work that you've got going on?
So wherever you get your podcasts for both Unraveled and for the First Degree, and I mean, my Instagram's at Alexis Linkletter. Yeah, really, my website is alexislinkletter.com. But the podcasts are really where I announce most of what I'm working on.
Fantastic. Alexis, I'm amazed with as busy as you are that you were able to spend this much time with me, and I appreciate it. It was very nice meeting you and hearing about your entire story. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight.
Oh, I appreciate that. Take care. We hope you enjoyed this interview. If there is someone you would like to hear from, a well-known creator or perhaps someone you feel that gets overlooked, please let us know in the comments. And please check out our playlist of past conversations. We appreciate you all. Please remember to like this episode and subscribe for more content like this. And thank you again for joining us for this episode of Courtroom Confidential Conversations.